All right, so we completed the chapter overview. All right, the slides. Let's do chapter hands-on now. You can turn, if you want to follow along, you can turn to page 305 in the book. Now this is going to be one of those chapters where we're going to be bouncing around just a little bit because it makes more sense to do that for a classroom setting than it does simply going from the beginning of that chapter to the end of the chapter. So we're going to be bouncing around just a little bit. Okay? All right, so if you would, let's see, you have your code editor open, a couple of browsers open, and I need you to create a brand new file for me, brand new HTML file, and put in all the proper code that we need to just basic HTML file. All right, so your file should look something like this. All right, our doc type, our HTML, our head, title, meta, and body. That's really the basics, right? Good. And that's where we're really going to start. Now, if you want, turn to page 316 if you're following along. So we are going to be skipping a few pages. And we are going to start, like I said, on 316. 316. All right, so let's go to our title element, right? Perhaps on line 4, and let's put in a title, something like contact form. Right. And now let's move to our body. Give me a couple of lines, tab it in. And why don't we put in an H1 element here, a heading 1 level. Oops. Let's fix that. There we go. All right, inside the H1, let's do contact us. So we'll type that in. And then give me a line or two after that. And this is where we're going to need our form, right? So let's do a open and close form tag. And so at this point, not from, form. There we go. So at this point, we've simply identified that what's going to happen in between the form tags is the actual form that will be submitted, right, to some form handler. Okay, we haven't defined that yet, but we will. We will. Okay, the first thing I'd like to do is I'm going to tab in and give myself a new line. And here, let's do our first name. So I'll do, that's the information we're going to request is their first name, whoever's filling out this form. So we'll create a label called first name. We won't use the label element yet. We'll just call first name the label that defines what the field is all about. And now we're going to use an input. An input element for users to input their first name. All right, so we have a few things to do here. So it is a non-paired element, the input, but we do have to fill out some of the attributes, right, for this input field. The first one is that we have to define what type of input it is. So let's use type, right, as our attribute. And there are many to choose from. We'll show you a lot of them tonight. Okay. This one's just simply going to be a text field. So we use the word text as the value of type. Now, we're also going to use two other fields. Okay, this is going to be common for all of the fields we type in, and same with yours in the future. We want to use the name attribute. The name attribute. The name is going to be an abbreviation of whatever the label is, because just way it makes it easier to identify what the name of this field actually is, right? So we define what this field is. It's a name field, right? So that's the name of this field. So we're going to need this for the server-side processing. So it knows exactly what's supposed to be inside the field, right? Fname. All right, the next thing we're going to add in there is the ID. So an ID is going to be, in this case, it can have the same name. So we'll use fname for the ID as well. And it's okay to have them as the same. You can have them different or the same. So the ID is used. Later on, we'll explain how that ID is used. But one way we can use the ID is for purposes of JavaScript, right, or scripting. So we can create some scripting behind the scenes, some JavaScript that says, do something to the input field called fname, right? Whatever that may be, right? Record the data that's in it, multiply it by something, and do something else, right? So it allows us to take an action, right, with this field. And so the ID's purpose, okay, is to essentially link to JavaScript if we want it to. Okay? So we'll call that fname, and we'll call the name fname as well. We'll call them the same. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to put a couple of break attributes after, or elements, so I can separate one field from the next. All right. So give me another line, and here we're going to do last name. Now I want to copy the entire input, and I'm going to paste it for last name. And I'm simply going to change what's appropriate. Right? The field is going to still be text, but it's no longer going to be called fname for first name. It's going to be called lname for last name. Okay. All right, so let's just make sure we understand the three attributes for input. One is the type, which defines the type of input. Is it a checkbox? Is it a radio button? Right? Is it a text box? Basic one line, right, where users can type in alpha and numeric characters. The name attribute. This is used with the server-side script. Okay? So it's specifically coded, right, to look at what the name is in the server-side script. The ID is used for JavaScript. So for client-side scripting, right, we can do things, and then we can tell, right, a particular field, right, to do something, right, or get an action taken upon it. So those are the three different attributes and how they're used. All right, I'm going to copy this two break elements, and I'm going to put them right after first and last name. All right, I want to save this. And now I want to display this in a browser. Just want to see what it looks like so far. There it is. All right, go ahead and fill it out and submit it. Did you just submit it? How'd you do that? Right? Yeah. We don't have a submit button yet, but we will. All right? Okay, so let's go back to our code, and let's start adding a few more, right, controls or fields. All right, the next one we're going to do is going to be an email field. So let's do email. And again, it's going to be a input. So I'm just going to copy that whole line, just like for last name, and then I'm going to make my changes, of course. So in this case, instead of the name being lname, I'm going to call it, let's see, email, for both the ID and the name. Okay, so we got a first name field, a last name field, and an email field. All right, give me another line or two, if you wish. I'll get rid of this extra one here. There we go. And then the last field we're going to look at, again, very basic form here, is a comment field. So I'm going to type in comments, right, in case the user has some. I'm just going to give myself a new line, and here's where we're going to use text area. So it's another control or field, and it is paired. There we go. So now I'll go ahead and save that and refresh your browser. So far, this is what it looks like. Please open this file in another browser, because sometimes these fields look a little different in different browsers. So I will open this file in IE and see what it looks like. Notice the difference between the comment field, right, the text area in IE and the text area in Firefox. There is a difference, right? All right, what about Chrome? Yeah, same thing as Firefox. What about Opera? Let's check that out. This is a little different. This has got lines going across. I think the other two had little dots, right? So there is some difference between what that looks like in different browsers. Okay. Even the box or the border, right, around each of them. In IE, as I hover over the field, it actually turns blue, right, by default. Right? Yeah, so this is, right, not all browsers have this, right? So as I go to Chrome, right? So now Chrome, if I hover over, nothing happens. But if I click in it, that's when it turns blue, right? So a little bit different. If I type something, no X, right? And now for, let's see, Opera, again, nothing with the hover. When I click on it, that's when you get the colored type, right? Nothing, no little X like you do in IE. So essentially, and I think here it actually changes colors. Yeah. So Firefox changes color very slightly, but it does change colors. Okay. All right. The last thing we need to add here, and I'm going to go back to my code, is some way to submit, right, this form. So it is an input. So in this case, we're simply going to add an input control, and then I want to define the type. So in this case, we still need that type attribute, and the type is going to be pretty simple. Submit. That's the type of input I want. Save it. Go to your browser, refresh, and now do you have a submit button? Yeah, well, I don't like where it's at. We'll fix that in a second. But go to your different browsers, right? Each browser is going to perhaps change the default wording on the button. In this case, for Opera, it says submit. But if I go to something like Firefox, it says submit query, right? So different completely. The browser manufacturer decided on that. Okay. Now, can we change that? What if I don't like the word submit query? I want it to be something else, right? Click here, go for it, submit, search, right? I don't know, anything we wanted to. Yes, we can actually change that, okay? So let's go to our code. In that input field, okay, type in the attribute called value. Type in any value you'd like. Whatever you want to appear on that button, right? So how about submit form as I want the user to see it. And now it does not say submit query anymore. It says submit form. And if I go to my different browsers, right, they all say submit form, because it's no longer the default. Okay? Great. Let's fix that submit button so it's not right next to the text area. So I'm just simply going to add a couple of breaks after the text area. Save that, flip-flop, refresh, and now, right, it's on the left-hand side there. Now, one of the things we can also do with our text area is define its size. So by default, you'll notice in the different browsers that the text area is a certain size and a certain width and a certain height. Okay? To change that, we add some attributes to the text area. So let's do that. So go to the opening text area tag, and let's use something called rows. Okay? So we're going to do rows. And the rows are going to equal, in this case, 4. So I want you to save that, refresh. And now, did you notice that your text area got a little bit larger, right? Good. Now, you want to put in 5, 10, 15, whatever number you want, it's going to change. Okay, so by default, it probably has 3 rows for the most part in most browsers. Okay. Now, we can also decide to increase the width of that, right, text area. We call this cols for columns. And so here we're going to add, let's see, it looks like 40. So 40 of them, save it, refresh, and now we've made that box a little bit wider. So this is how you would change the text area's height and width, or number of rows and number of columns. Okay. Now, we're still not done with the text area because we have not yet defined its name or the ID. So let's do that now. So let's call the name of this, right, field, we're going to call it comments. And then the ID is going to be called the same. Comments. So every field, right, except for the input, right, you can have it as well, okay, but everything other than the input must have a name, or it's not going to do anything on the server side, right? You can optionally also include a name for the submit button if you want. Okay? So unless you want to record anything about the input or the submit button, that's when you would include a name, and then the programming behind the scenes is then right appropriate or right for that submit button. Okay, let's save it. Go to your browser, refresh, and now fill out the form and submit. Cool. Where'd it go? Pretty much. The only place it actually went is in your address bar. Take a look at the address bar. Do you see all of the stuff you just typed in that URL? Yeah. So that's really where it went. It didn't go anywhere. Okay. It cleaned up the page and put all that data in the address bar in a nice URL. Okay. Now, to get this form to work, we still need to fill out the form, right, element. So that first tag, we need to add 2 attributes. What are the 2 attributes we need for the form to actually work? What's the first one? So action and how we take that action. The method, right? The method of that action. Great. So let's go back to our code. Let's find our opening form tag. Okay. We're going to type in method. Oops. And this is going to be post. Okay. We have get and post. Post is more secure than get. All right. Now, the next one is action. Okay. So let me write it out, and then you can just copy what I'm writing. Okay. So this is a pre-designed form handler for us already, specifically for this little exercise. Okay. So let me go ahead and type in the URL for it. Oops. And it is, let's see. All right. So there is your URL, your fully qualified URL for the file that's on a server called webdevbasics.net inside of a folder called scripts with a file name called demo.php. So there's your server-side script handler, right? Your form handler. And so when we press submit, it's going to send all that data that you saw in that URL, right, in the address bar, to that file. And that file will process it for us. Okay? Again, this course does not teach us or teach you how to, right, create that demo.php file. We're learning this part. Okay? Another class will teach you how to build that PHP file. Okay? All right, let's save it. Go to your browser, refresh. Don't forget to refresh. Now go ahead and fill that form in again. And hopefully we'll get a response. Now the response, or the demo.php, was designed, okay, it was coded this way, to provide you with a response. Simply providing with what you typed in, it will give it back to you with your information has been received. This is what you typed in for first name. This is what you typed in for last name, email, and comments. Now, do you see the correlation between the name field and what you see listed there? Right? So that's what's important. So that name field is important. Okay? So it has to match what's been coded on the server side. Okay? Notice your address bar, webdevbasics.net/scripts/demo.php. So you're actually on that file, right? You're looking at the demo.php file, the result of it, right? The output of that file. Okay? All right, let's go ahead and click your back button, and that is a basic form. That's it. Right? We're going to go over some more stuff, of course, but this is the basics. Okay? Choose your controls, fill in the action and the method, and have a server-side, right, form handler to handle whatever data is being submitted. Okay? All right. Now, let's go ahead and turn back to page 312. 312. So, between the comments and the submit button, give me a new line, and we're going to show you how to create check boxes. Okay? Now, check boxes and radio buttons. What's the difference? One is a square and one is a circle. Besides that. And radio buttons? Only one, right? So that's the difference between a checkbox and a radio button, right? Or a radio button list. Checkboxes, more than one. Radio, only one. Cool. All right, our first sample is going to be a checkbox list. So choose the browser you use. So choose the browser you use. Okay. And I'm going to put a break there after there. Perfect. And now underneath that question, essentially, or selection or statement, we're going to put in 3 different options: Internet Explorer, Firefox, and Opera. So the first thing we're going to need is the input field. Just put 1 in for now. We'll do some copy paste so it's a little bit faster once we fill out the first one. Okay? Great. All right, after the input, inside of the input control, we're going to need a type. The type is going to be called checkbox. And that simply states that it's a checkbox. Right? You're going to get a square that they can click on. All right. We still have to put in all the other elements or the attributes like we did in the previous fields. So we still need a name attribute. The name for this one is going to be the actual value we want for the checkbox. So in this case, we'll just do IE. All right, we're going to use an ID, and it'll be the same. IE. So when somebody checks this checkbox, right, the server-side script will know that this checkbox is actually the Internet Explorer checkbox, right? Now, we'll add one more in there in case, one more in there, and we'll do something like value equals yes, which means if they happen to check the box, right, that will be the value of this particular field. So the server-side script says, oh, okay, it looks like somebody checked this box, right? Yes. And the box they checked is Internet Explorer. Okay, so we need that value in there. Great. After the closing wicket of that first input checkbox, let's put in an actual label. And let's put in Internet Explorer. Oops, didn't spell that right. Explorer. Explorer. And then I think I'm going to need a little break here. And that'll be our one line that we'll copy and then adjust. Okay? All right, so let's go over that one more time. We have, let's see here, an input, the type of checkbox. The name is going to be IE. Okay? The ID is going to be IE, and the value is going to be yes. So when the server-side script looks at this particular control, right, and identifies that it's IE as the name, and it has been checked, it will use yes as the value. So it'll identify that yes, Internet Explorer has been selected. Okay? All right, so let's copy that and paste it right underneath it. We'll have to change three things. The first is the name to the new, right, checkbox for Firefox. And I'll use a lowercase here, that's fine. Nobody typically sees what's in the name. So the value of the name field, you don't necessarily see that. Okay? So I'm going to replace the ID with Firefox as well. The value is still going to be yes because it's been selected, right? So when it's selected, the value is then will be yes. And then the label for this particular box will be Firefox. And I got rid of the break. Not bad. There we go. All right, give me a new line. And I'm going to copy the line before it, paste it in, and again, changing what's necessary. In this case, it looks like Opera, or you could choose any other browser. It's up to you. You don't have to use the example. Oh, I keep forgetting to change that. Lowercase. All right, now I'm going to change the ID from Firefox to Opera, and then I will change the label from Firefox to Opera, and I'll give it a nice uppercase because this is what the user sees. Right? Now I'm going to give it another break, actually probably 3 here, just for kicks. All right, now save what you got. Flip-flop to your browser, refresh, and so you should now have, right, 3 checkboxes. Are you able to choose more than one? You should be able to check off more than one option. Yes, I might use all 3, right? Or I click and choose, no, I only really use 1. Now, this is just for something later on. Try clicking on the labels. What happens when you click on the labels? Nothing, right? You click all you want, but nothing happens. All right, so later on when we talk about the label, right, element, we'll do this again, and you'll see that you can click on the labels, and it will actually check off the box. So there's a nice little accessibility feature for us. Okay. Now, moving forward, if you try to fill this out and submit, the form handler was specifically designed for the fields you see above. you may not get results, right, from the fields we're adding or controls that we're adding, just as an FYI. Okay, so if I submit this, right, it looks like it's actually pulling that, so we're okay. So if what we want to see is what we get, the value, you'll see IE and yes. Okay, so going forward, you may not get a result from the control we add. Okay, all depends on whether that server-side script has been coded to, right, see that. All right, let's go back. And now let's go to our code, and we're going to add a radio, right, radio button. We'll have 3 options there as well. Now, to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to copy my 4 lines of code. And then I'm going to paste it. In this case, I can do something like choose the one browser you use the most. So there's our statement. Now, we need to change the type. It's no longer checkbox. It's going to be radio. And those should be the same for all 3. Now, this is where it changes a bit. So far, with all of our fields, the names were unique to that particular field, right, or option in the checklist. For a radio button to work, all the names of each of the radio buttons need to be the same. Okay, that's how it groups them together and identifies that you can only choose one within that group. So, let's change the name, right, in these 3 controls from IE, Firefox, and Opera to something like favorite browser. Okay, so I'm going to replace this with fav browser. And I'm going to copy that and put it for all the rest. Copy, paste, and paste. So for it to identify them as part of the same group, right, of radio buttons, the name needs to be the same. Now, the other difference is the value. Okay? Because the name are all the same, if the user chooses one of the 3, I need to be able to identify which of the 3 they chose. I can't at this point because the names are the same. So what I need to do is I need to change the value to the actual value that I want to identify as which is this particular radio button. So now we'll use the value, we'll change the value from yes to IE, Firefox and Opera in this case. So IE, oops, not IR, IE, and I'll just copy it from here. Firefox and Opera. This is how, right, we'll identify which of the 3 radio buttons were selected. That's the only way we can do it, because at this point, the names are the same, and we won't know which one. All right, save it, flip-flop to your browser, refresh, and you now should have, right, a radio set. If we did it right, you should only be able to choose one of those 3. And that is because of the name, that they're all the same. Okay. All right, I'm going to submit that and see what we get. So if I go back, I had Internet Explorer chosen. I'm now going to choose Firefox and submit again. Favorite browser? Firefox. And that's because it's pulling it from the value attribute. Okay. Great. Any questions? How's the pace? Good. Good to hear. Let's go back to our code and let's continue on. All right, please turn to page 318. Again, we're going to jump around a little bit here. 318 has us create a select element or drop-down menu or drop-down box. Okay? And so this contains two elements, the select element and the option element. Okay. So what's going to be our question? We're going to, let's see, look at, again, our favorite browsers. So let's go ahead and put in a select element. And this one is paired. So give me a couple of lines and then go ahead and close it. Now, inside the select element, this is where we put in our options. Okay. Now, before we do that, I'd like to add some information that's necessary for the select. It is a control or field, so we have to fill out some of the default kind of attributes. The first one we're going to do is name. We have to name this particular control, and we're going to call it Fav Browser. Okay, so our favorite browser list here. We're also going to give it an ID with the same name. So I'm just going to copy paste. Now, we're also going to identify that the size of my list is only going to have one row. So we type in size equals 1. This will give us one line with an arrow. We click it, it drops down the list that we're about to create. All right. Inside the select element, tab in, right? And now we're going to put in our option. So please create the option element. It is paired, and you don't have to get a new line for this. Just put it right next to it. So here's our option. What goes in between the options is what you want to see in the list. So our first one is going to be select your favorite browser. All right. So that's what's going to be in the actual list. Now, we don't want one of these to be this particular one to be an option, right, for them. We just simply want it to be there to let them know what they need to do. Select your favorite browser. So let's copy this line and paste it underneath. And now let's actually create one of the real options for them to choose. The first option that they'll be able to choose, right, is, let's see, it looks like Internet Explorer. So Internet. So they'll see this in the list. And if they choose this one from the list, we have to provide something that identifies that. So in the opening option tag of that line, we're going to use value again. Value will identify the actual browser, right, that was chosen in the list. In this case, IE. This is on page 318 and 319. Okay. All right, let's copy that line. Give me a new one and paste it. This time, it's going to be Firefox. So change the value to Firefox and then change the actual label, right, to Firefox as well. Give me a new line, paste the option line, replace the value with something else, Opera in this case, and then change the label to the same. If you want to use, I think the book has Chrome instead, but it's up to you. Doesn't matter. All right, save what you got, and let's see what it looks like. Oh, got to put some breaks in there. So let's add a couple of breaks at the end of select. There we go. So now this is what my drop down looks like. It's one row. Click on the arrow, and there are your options. Okay? So choose one of them. Notice how you can only choose one of them. Submit it. And in this case, we don't get a result here, right? So that, it's probably maybe because we're using the, let's see if we change the name to something else. Let's call this just browser instead of fav browser, because we already have one called that. So let's just call it browser. And now let's choose one of those. Yeah, good. Since we already had the fav browsers now. Right, that's... Now, what happens if I don't choose, right, an option from the list? I simply leave the selection, right? Select your favorite browser. I don't pick one. That's what the user or the developer gets. That's the answer that the form handler receives, is simply select your favorite browser, which means the user never chose one from the list. Okay. Now, this particular example shows only one option in that drop down. That is, I have one row and I can only choose one option. But what if I'd like all 3 or 4 options to be visible and then allow the user to choose more than one? Right? That's pretty common. Right? So let's go back to our code and let's add another selection list. So please copy the selection control. Give me a couple more lines and let's make our changes. I'm going to be following what's on page 319 at the bottom. There's not that much I have to change. So the first thing I'm going to change is the name of this one because I don't want it to be repeated. All right, so we'll call this one Jump Menu. And I'll use that as the ID as well. However, instead of the size being 1, the size will now be 3. For the 3 options that we're about to have, I'm going to remove the first option, the select your favorite browser. I no longer need that option since I'm going to be displaying all 3 of them at the same time. All right, go ahead and save that. Go to your browser, refresh, and you now should have, right, 3 options instead of 1. Okay. Now, I can pick one. Sounds good. Let me submit it. There's my jump menu, Firefox, sounds good. But now I want to select multiple ones. What's the deal? Why can't I select multiple ones? I can see more than one. I need another attribute that allows me to do that. So let's go back to our code. And inside of the opening select for our jump menu, I want you to use the attribute called multiple. And the value for multiple is multiple. It's the same thing. This should allow us to select more than one option in that list. So save it, flip-flop to your browser, refresh, and now I should be able to choose 1, 2, or all 3. Okay. Now, is everyone comfortable how I chose the first and the third option? What key do I need to use to accomplish this? Control. What if I wanted to select the first one, the second one, and the third one all at the same time? Fantastic. Perfect. Okay. So shift allows selection of contiguous. Control allows selection of non-contiguous. Okay. Good deal. Can we move on? All right, let's do it. That was page 318 and 319. Select option, select element and option element. Let's now talk about the label. Right? I think we talked about it a couple of times, and now we're finally there. Page 320 and 321. So there's two ways that we can configure the label element. Okay? I like the second option, number 2 on page 320. This gives you a lot more flexibility, and I would recommend this option instead of number 1. So that's the one we're going to do here in class. So let's scroll up to the top, or towards the top, where our first name field is. What I'd like to do is I'd like to identify that first name is the actual label, and then associate that label with the field that goes along with it, right? The input. So let's do that. We're going to wrap first name in a label element. So label, and it's a paired, and then I'm going to put a closing label after first name. So I'm specifically identifying the words first name and the colon as the label. Okay? The label to what? We don't know yet. But we simply said this is a label. The question is, how do I associate this label with that field, the input field for first name? Okay? We have to use another attribute. So in the label, opening label tag, please use the attribute called for. So what is this label for? Okay? So this label is for the F name. So put in F name for the value. And that will connect this label with the field, right, for first name. Now, this is where, and I had mentioned this early on in the class while we were talking about the different options for label, or for ID, right? So this is where ID comes into play again. So not only is it used for JavaScript when you want to do something specific to a specific control, right? You provide the ID name. But when we use label, it's looking for the ID name, right? So the word for and the word ID, those go together, okay? Okay, very good. So save that. Go to your browser, refresh the browser. Okay. Actually, I'm going to do a hard refresh so it totally cleans the screen. A hard refresh is Control F5. Okay. That goes back to the actual file and pulls it in again. Instead of taking your mouse and clicking inside the text field, try clicking on the label instead. And what happens to your cursor? It goes inside the box, right? So what this allows us to do is make this form a little bit easier to fill out. Users do not have to be so specific in their click. They can click the box or they can click the label. It doesn't matter, right? As we get to these, right, the label makes a lot more sense because it's a little bit harder to click on these circles than it is, right, these words. And so especially for perhaps older individuals, right, that may not have perfect eyesight, right, or, right, movement of their limbs like their hand, it may be easier for them to choose the label than it is to try to click on a little circle, right? So again, accessibility, a very nice option here. So please take a moment to add a label to last name on your own, or at least without my help. All right, so next we're going to take a look at field set and the legend element on pages 322 and 323. Okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to decide what is a logical set of, right, what's a logical grouping here? Perhaps user information, first name, last name, email. Perhaps browser information, right? So we could have actually several different sets of fields that go together. In this case, the first one we're going to do is a field set that essentially groups first, last, and email together. So let's go back to our code. And above the first name field and the label, of course, right? So the line above it, let's put in our field set opening tag. It is paired. So once you type in the open one, go down below email and put in the closing field set. Save this and see what you get in your browser. Now, what's happening in my particular situation is that my field set is actually after the breaks. So this is why my line is right next to the text area. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to move the breaks and put them after the field set. Now, that makes more sense. Okay. Now, notice the field set. Woo! It takes up the whole page, right? Because we have not defined the width, which we are going to do a little bit of styling, okay, in just a moment. Now, before we move on to the styling of the field set and the legend, let's add a legend. So, after the field set, let's put in a legend. It's paired. And now we simply define what we want the legend to be for the field set. And for this particular example, we can really write anything. How about user information? User information. You can put whatever you'd like in. Doesn't really matter. Just so it's between the opening and closing legend tags. All right, save it. Flip-flop to your browser, refresh, and now notice that the legend appears inside, right, of that field set. All right, now let's do a little styling. We're going to style the field set and the legend. That's on page 323 at the top. So, after the meta character set, up in the head, give me a couple lines. And now let's put in an embedded style sheet, right? So style, again, we're only doing this for class purposes because it's easier to work with one file than it is to work with multiple files. All right, the first rule we're going to create is for the field set selector. We're going to add a width, a border, font family, and padding, it appears. So I'm going to do one at a time just so we can kind of see how it builds. And we got 500 pixels. All right, there we go. That looks a lot better now. Okay, a little bit smaller. Then we have, let's see, border. And we got 2 pixel, ridge. Okay, so we're doing ridge. And it looks like we're doing red. So we're going to do an F00 for the shortcut. There we go. That's nice. And then we have, what else? Looks like we're doing, we're changing the font family of whatever's within the field set. So font-family. Oops. Lee. That's better. And we're doing Arial and sans serif. Arial and sans serif. There we go. So we changed that. That's cool. And one more. It looks like we're going to give it a little bit of padding all the way around. How much? 10 pixels. Very good. All right. Looks a little better. Not bad. So that's a little bit of styling. All right. Let's. Let me tab this in. There we go. That much better. All right. The next rule we're going to create is for the legend. All right. The first field, or the first property, is going to be font family. There's only two, so font family and font weight. So I'm going to copy font family from the one above. I'm going to paste it in there. And it looks like they want Georgia or Times New Roman. So let's do that. So Georgia, or in quotes, they want Times New Roman. And then we also have a serif. None of those are good. So we'll see what that looks like. All right, so now our legend is now a serif font. That's kind of neat. And I think they also wanted something else, I believe, right? The font weight. Oops. Font weight. Bold. Okay. Better. Any questions? All right. Let's continue on. We have one more rule to create, and that's for the label. So the label is going to have some padding. Great. And only on the left, though. That's going to be 10 pixels. Now, I only have one label, so you have two at least. And so you'll be pushing that over a little bit. All right, please create another field set with a label for the checkbox and radio button. Both of these should be in another field set. So one field set for both of these, right? The checkbox and radio button should go into one field set. Okay, a different one. Okay, so I'll give you some time to do that. Okay, now that we've played with some of these basic controls that we have available to us that are standard, right, and work in every browser, okay, every browser. Let's take a look at some of the HTML5, right, new controls that we have. Turn to page 330 and 331. We're going to take a look at the email control, the URL control, and the telephone control. Right? There's not a lot of difference, right? It's simply the type. So let's do that. Let's go to our code and go ahead and display the user information. Page 330 has email address input form control. What we're going to do here is we're going to change a couple things from the email control. Instead of being type text, it's going to be type email. What does that do, though? What that does is that it's inherent now to that field that it should only accept an email address. That's the idea. And if it doesn't have an email address, then it's going to tell you it's wrong, right? You need to put in an email address. So go ahead and save that. Flip-flop to your browser. Refresh. Okay? Make sure you refresh. It shouldn't change or look any different, okay? But as soon as I type in something that's perhaps not an email address, notice how if I tab out of that, it actually makes that field red, right? Please enter an email address automatically. We did not code this in. We didn't use a title attribute. It automatically did that because we're using the type email. Now, if I decide to add in @ right? MSN.com, let's say, right? I tab out of it. Hey, it's happy, right? So it can identify an email address for us. This is huge, only because prior to this, right, type of control, we had to do this with JavaScript. So we had to write lines of code to check what was in there to make sure it had an @ sign, make sure that it had a .com or .org or some dot and some 3-character, perhaps more, suffix, right? So it was some code to have that done. And now we don't have to worry about that. It's already built in. Gotta like that. All right? All right, let's move on. Now, what I'd like to recommend, instead of having to create additional elements or additional controls, let's simply change the email to the different ones we're trying to do. So in this case, we're going to do a URL control. So change the word email in the label to URL. And now the type is no longer going to be email, it's going to be URL. Save it. Flip-flop. And now this, right, is supposed to be able to take an email. I mean a URL. Right? So in this case, perhaps, right, our www, right, so if I hover over it, does it give us any information? Please enter in a URL. .google.com. Right? Ooh, it didn't like that. But isn't this a URL? What am I forgetting? All right, let's try that. Now if I tab away, it likes it, right? So it's looking for a fully qualified URL, which includes the HTTP, right? The service that they're using, right? It's the HTTP protocol. Okay. Now, just for kicks, I'm curious, does it recognize FTP? Yep, the FTP protocol. And it does, right? So it can recognize these different protocols. And how about HTTPS? See if it recognizes that. And it does, right? So it is programmed already to, right, know the different URL or services available or protocols that can be used. That's kind of cool. You gotta like that. All right, let's move on. Page 331, the telephone, right, control. So I'm going to replace the word URL with phone. Oops. All right, can I spell today? There we go. Okay. And now our type is no longer URL, but is now tel for telephone. Okay. So save that, flip-flop, refresh, and there's our phone. All right, there's our phone. So now if I do some letters, right? Oh, it didn't pick that one up. Maybe this perhaps this browser doesn't recognize the TEL. It's possible, right? It's possible. So let's try this on a different browser. This is Firefox, I believe. So let me refresh this. Let me put in some text. Ooh, it already has an extra. Does it give us any message? No message. It's possible that the browsers don't recognize this one yet. Let's try phone here. What do we got? Opera. Let's try that one. Those are the only ones that I have open. Yeah. So if I just do a phone number. Oops, got a letter in there. Yeah. So it appears that right now some of these browsers don't recognize the tel type. Right, the tel, where we at? Right there. Excuse me, the tel type. Okay. This is a good place that we can have a conversation about modern browsers and some of the HTML5, right, controls that some of the browsers don't recognize. It's possible. Okay. Yeah. Well, it does. In some cases, right, it'll allow for that hyperlink to happen, right? And I think in a mobile device. Yeah, yeah. in a desktop. So just be aware that you may not get what you expect, right, in the device that you're using. All right, let's continue on. So that was, I want to go to right there. Sorry. That was page 331, the telephone, or tel. Moving forward, 332 and 333. Let's take a look at that data list. Again, this is the control that allows us to provide a list, but let the user enter in something that may not be in the list. So we're going to copy and paste something that's already kind of built for us, and then we'll adjust it as necessary. So let's go and choose our, let's see, what can we do here? I think probably, I guess the last one's fine. So I'm going to select the last selection that we did, which I think was our our jump menu that we called it. So copy that. And then paste it. And here we'll create our data list. All right, so let's do favorite color. Oops. There we go. The next thing we're going to do is an input. So we don't really need select here, but what we need is input. And we're going to get rid of select down here. Just for now. Okay. All right, let's fill in some of the input here. The name we're going to use, it looks like, actually we need a type. So we'll need that too. So type equal, in this case, text, right? We want them to give the ability to type it in. So that's kind of nice. And the name is going to be color. The ID will be color. We do not need size here. We do not need multiple either. But we do need list. An additional attribute that we need, and we'll call it color as well, or colors. Actually, this is colors, not color. So we need the S to differentiate it and make it part of the data list. So the value of list will go with the value of the data list ID. So there's your connection. So, all right, after the input, give me a new line, and let's add in the data list select element. And then let's put that at the bottom of the options list. So I'm just going to tab these in so it's a little bit easier to see our structure. Okay. Now what's important is that we need to go back to our opening data list tag and add in the ID, right, that connects that input with the data list, and that is colors. Right. So we're going to provide a drop-down list. But if that drop-down list doesn't have the color the user wants, or in this case, browsers, I guess, we're going to allow them to type in their own value if they like. Okay. All right, so let's change a few things here. So we're going to get rid of, we're going to choose, what do we have? Value. We're going to get rid of this, and we're going to do red. And we don't need the closing option here. So then we're going to go, what else? Blue. Put in whatever colors you'd like. Okay. There we have cyan. We do something else. Brown. That was exciting. Exciting color. All right, let's see what we got here. So save that. Flip-flop to your browser. Refresh. All right. Drop down the list. Hold on a second. Let me create some more breaks here. It's hard to see at the bottom there. All right, that's better. So now, I hover over favorite colors. I drop down my list. I can choose one if I want. Or, no, I don't want to choose one of those. I want to type in my own color. Right? So there's our data list. Provides a list, but also allows for entry if the item is not in the list. Page 232, 332 and 333, the data list. All right. Page 334 and 335. We talk about the slide, the slider, and the spinner. So again, two additional controls, right, for HTML5. All right. Let's go back to our code. And let's see, it's an input. So let's go back up to our phone and let's modify this one. So we're going to call this one, instead of phone, we'll call it, let's see here. There's a label to it. Choose, let's see, I guess here it's just choose a number. No, we have to do a couple things here. We can't just, yeah, okay. So in this case, let's give this low for the beginning of the slider. I'm sorry, the slider. And now after the input field, we're going to do high. And in between is going to be the slider. Okay. So now the type is no longer tel or telephone. It's range. That's the type for our input. Okay. All right. Now we have to define the range that we want. So in this case, the range is going to be a minimum of 1 and a max of 100. For now, we can leave the name alone. For now. Just trying to look at the time and see what other controls we have left. Okay. Of course, these should be called something appropriate, right? Whatever the name and ID should be. So save that. Flip-flop to your browser. Refresh. And here is your slider, which used to be the phone, which used to be the URL, which used to be the email. And so now as I scroll back and forth, each point, right, is between 1 and 100, right? So minimum is 1, the max is 100, so each of these is 1 point, right? And I'm simply using my arrow keys to go left and right, 1 point at a time. So if I go all the way to the left, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. Okay. Sound good? All right. Let's go back to our code and let's convert this range, right, or this slider to a spinner. Okay. That's on page 335. Great. So I'm going to remove the label there. And in my input type, we're going to give that number. So the type is going to be number. And what else do we need? We'll have a min and max as well. So the min will be 1. And all right, we can keep 100 in there, but I think it's going to be pretty big list. Let's do 10, right? Or maybe even 20. Let's see what happens there. All right, so save that. We can actually get rid of the word high. Save that, refresh. All right, as soon as I hover over it, I get little arrows. I can go up and down all the way from 1 to 20. I cannot go over 20, and I cannot go under 1. There's your spinner. Okay. Again, make sure, right, that you check the browsers, right, of your users, right? So if you're kind of building a website or you're redoing a website or redesign, know who your audience is. So if the majority of your audience is using an older browser, you may not want to use these HTML5 controls. Because what you're going to get is not what you see here, right? They're basically just fields. So if that's okay with you, right, make sure that you set it up appropriately. So in this case, right, the user won't really know what this field is for, right? So you definitely want to give it a label and so on, right? So let's see if any of the other browsers don't recognize it. Yeah, look at that. IE does not recognize the the spinner. This version of IE does not. Right? All they get is a text box. Be prepared. If that's okay with you, just make sure that you've labeled it enough that the user knows that they're going to have to put something in between 1 and 20 in this case. Right? Chrome. Figures it out. Good. And Opera. Yeah. Yeah. And look at the difference. Wow. The difference in size, right, between Opera, Chrome, and then Firefox. So again, we can always style this stuff, so that's no big deal. Oh, it is? Oh, okay. How is it different? Okay. Yeah. It's like a little bar. Oh, okay. All right, so the styling's a little bit different. Yeah. All right. Very good. All right, so just be prepared, right? So be aware. Always do your testing to make sure that what the user might get is what is okay, right, with what you expect. Okay. And if it works. All right, that was 334 and 335, the slider and spinner. All right, turn to page 336 and 337. We'll do two more. The calendar and the color well. Okay? All right, so here, so again, we're going to replace the number with our color well. So we're just going to do something like, choose color or pick your color. And now your input is going to be, let's see, we'll do the inkwell first. Will be color instead of number. And then we do not need min, we do not need max. Those are specific, right, to our slider and our spinner. So save that, refresh. Here's pick your color, click it, and right. So consider the olden days for a moment where this was not possible with simply a type. You had to actually code this if you wanted this. All right, so this is fantastic. Right? If in the event your form requires color, right? A color choice. All right, let's go back to our code, and we're going to do pick your date. And now we're going to change our type from color to date. Save that, flip-flop, refresh, and it looks like, ooh, Firefox does not recognize date as a type. Let's see if some of the other ones do. Nope. Ah, there we go. So it looks like, what is that? Chrome recognizes date. Right? So now I can use my little spinners, right, to increase or decrease each of the date fields, or drop down the arrow and choose from a calendar, whichever makes sense. I would have thought by between the time that this book came out and now that IE would have figured that out by now, but I guess not. Which one? Edge? Oh, okay. Wow. Out of all of them. Yeah. But we're gonna code in date because that one's really important. That's too funny. All right. Any questions? So some really cool fields, right, and controls that we can add into our form. We just have to really understand which browsers recognize them, which ones don't, and whether you actually need a spinner or a slider or a color well, right? Cool. That was on 336 and 337. Any questions? All right. If you don't have any questions, that's all I got for you. I have 9:26. Ooh, you got 4 extra minutes.